Are you looking to add a little bit of a personal touch to your dog walks? Well, today we're going to be making our own dog leash. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating unique pieces of wearable art, both for me and sometimes for my brother's dogs. So I am super excited to dive in and create this leash. If you're interested in following along, you can find the pattern down below. And let's get started. The first thing we're going to need to do is gather all our materials. So I have some washed cotton here from Joann's. I think it is adorable little puppy feet. And then I also have some nylon strapping as well as a D-ring and a dog clippy hook. You can find all of these materials down in the description below if you want a link to them so you can get them as well. So let's talk about this fabric really fast. Normally I would put this pattern on grain, but since I would need at least 72 inches and I'm only using a very small bit, I decided instead of buying at least 2 yards, sometimes a little bit more depending on the length you want, I am going to instead put this pattern on the cross grain. I'm doing this because I know the nylon strapping is actually going to be the structural security of this leash and not the cotton fabric. Even if you put the cotton fabric on grain, a dog could definitely pull through that. So I'm going to start by first marking out my pattern cross grain. You can definitely print out the pattern and cut it, or you can just mark the size of squares that you need, or the size of rectangles that you need for each of these leashes. Since I know I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to make this double, which is going to make this leash a little bit longer than the pattern I have. But really what you need to know is how much you need for those 2 ends, and then the center part can be as long or as short as you want it to be. So I'm going to get out my nice long ruler, and so I can make a nice smooth mark all the way down this line. I'm going to go as close as I can to this serging. So I'm just going to smooth out my fabric and make sure I'm getting nice and close. And then I'm going to start marking 1/2 of my pattern. Because I am so close to the edge and I haven't pinned it down at all, it is giving me a little bit of trouble. But if you push down on your ruler and pull on the chalk, you will be able to actually mark the hem. So now, normally I would go and mark this stitch line. However, in this case, I actually want to mark my fold line for the pattern so that I have a line I'm guiding up to fold to. So I'm going to go ahead and mark on both sides of these where I'd be folding each side of the dog leash to. And because I have inch wide strapping, it actually turned out to be very handy that I am just marking every inch, because I put 1/2 inch in for the turn back, and then I have 1 inch and 1 inch, and then another 1/2 inch turn back. So you actually want to mark every inch. So I have nice lines. You want to make sure you know which line you want to cut on before you actually start cutting though. So then I'm going to cut apart this pattern. So I'm going to cut off this edge serging bit and get a nice straight line. And then I'm going to cut the other piece apart and finally cut the last piece off. Now that I have my pieces cut, it's time to move over to my sewing machine. And because I'm not doing this on grain, but doing it on the cross grain, I actually have to sew my pieces together. So I'm just going to take that salvage edge, and because this pattern's a little bit crazy. I'm not going to worry too much about pattern matching. I'm just going to sew right up next to this salvage edge, making sure that I backstitch at the beginning, sew all the way across, and backstitch at the end. This is, so now I have my excessively long piece. It's now over 72 inches. It is now closer to about 82 inches. But I am so excited to get this started. So next we're going to move over to the ironing board, and we're just going to press this center bit open. You can cut it down if you want. I'm just choosing to just leave it in there. And then we are going to fold in and iron each of the sides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold up to my fold line, my fold guideline. This is the way I'm measuring my 1/2 inch instead of actually having to figure it out. That's why I marked the fold guideline instead of marking my stitch line. So I'm just working my way slowly all the way across my dog leash. And then once I've done the first side, it is time to do the second side. Now, when you're doing the second side, make sure that you don't accidentally hit the first side and uniron it at all. That can be an issue. So just be aware that you might do that. I did it once or twice, and you just want to make sure that you kind of go back and fix those spots. Then once we have those two sides ironed, we're going to do a full fold in half and iron it down again, just like so. We're going to make sure that you're lining them up nice and neat and that you are just giving it a really nice press. Doing all this prep work will make it so much easier when you're actually sewing it. You don't have to do this beforehand, but I would highly, highly recommend it because it will make the sewing of your dog leash so much faster. And there we go. It's now all ironed, so it's time to move back to the sewing machine. So you're going to, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get an about length for my nylon strapping. So I'm going to go ahead and just measure it by pinning on one end and slowly working all the way to the other. Since I did not go exactly with my pattern, I'm going with a double of the length of my fabric. So I don't have the exact length. So I'm just going to go ahead and measure it. And once I get to the end, I'm going to cut it off a little bit shy of the cotton because I definitely want the cotton longer than I want the nylon strapping. So we're going to get my scissors out, cut it. I'm going to immediately use a lighter to burn the end to get it to melt together so it doesn't continue to fray. I always like to do this immediately so that I have no problems later. And I also like to immediately lighter the other side of the nylon strapping that's staying on the roll. That way that end always stays nice and I don't have to worry about it later. Then once I have it all, I'm going to wrap it up nice and neat, put a pin back in it, set it aside so that it's ready for my next project, and I'm already partially cleaned up. Next, it's time to actually put the nylon strapping into the cotton. So I'm just going to open it up and I'm going to slide it under. I don't want to start right at the beginning of the cotton. I do want a little bit of the cotton to flip under to make it look nice, but I'm going to slide it under one of the 1/2 inch folds I have and then fold it around. I'm just going to pin it to help stabilize it a little bit so that I know it will all stay inside and where I want it to go. And I'm just going to continue to move the nylon strapping into just inside the 1/2 inch fold and then close it all up and pin it. Now that I have that done, I'm going to actually sew this. So I'm going to start at one end, and I'm going to start on the end that is the opening end. I'm going to make sure to backstitch at the beginning, and we're going to stitch all the way down. So, and I got off right there at the very beginning. You always have to be careful of that. I wasn't holding tight enough and it kind of rolled on me. So that's one thing you do have to be aware of. So I'm going to quickly unpick this and we're going to try that again. Okay, let's try this again. We're going to hold this a little bit tighter this time to hopefully make sure it doesn't roll out like that. So I'm just going to give it a nice sturdy hold. There we go. And it started and we're good. So I'm going to pull this pin and then I'm going to keep sewing. And it's kind of one of those that you want to adjust it as you go. So I'm going to sew a little bit and then I'm going to adjust and make sure everything's working. And I might have to, it looks like I pinned a little bit too close in one area, so I'm going to have to be stretching it out just a little bit. You do want to be aware that because I am sewing on the grain, or I'm sewing on the cross grain, it has a little bit more wiggle room than it would if it was on the grain. So when I do sew this, I'm going to sew both of them from top to bottom, or starting at the same end and going and working all the way to the other end. And here we are coming to the other end. And again, it doesn't go all the way to the edge of the cotton. So I'm just going to backstitch and then I'm going to pull the leash all the way back to the beginning, like I said. And now we're going to sew the other side down. And this side's going to be a lot easier because it's all sturdy. It shouldn't be doing anything funky or wonky. So I just have to guide it, make sure that I'm keeping an even stitch line from the edge of that foot. Make sure it doesn't get caught on your foot like it just did on mine because it's an extra long leash. And we're just going to sew, sew, sew. And there we have it. We are now to the other end of the leash. And we have the base of our leash all done and prepped. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add on the dog hook and then make the wrist strap. So I'm going to start with the dog hook first. So I'm going to pull through about an inch and about 2 inches through. And I'm going to sew a X around this dog leash. So I'm going to start, make sure you backstitch, and I'm going to sew this X pattern you see here around this dog leash. Now I also want to make sure that I have a really close stitch all the way as close as I can get to the metal without going through that metal. And this is just to make sure that it doesn't want to twist on me or do anything funky. So you just want to make that nice and close without hitting the metal. And I always like to do a little bit of a backstitch there before, just to make sure that particular seam is very sturdy. Then we're going to continue up the next side. And now we're going to actually create the X. But because of how the foot and the machine work, I'm not going to actually be able to create the full X. So I'm going to do a double line here. So I'm just going to move just offside of it, sew up, so that then now there is a double seam nice and close there. And finish off with the other half of the X. There we go. Trim my threads. And there we have it. That's what it looks like finished. Now that we have the hook sewn on, it's time to actually do the handle. I always like to have my handle at least 8 inches or at least 7 inches on the double, so at least 14 inches. It depends on your hands, depends on how tight you want it. So you just want to mark that. you want to make sure you slip on your D-ring. If you don't slip on your D-ring, you're going to have to redo it later. So make sure you slip on that D-ring. And now we're going to do the same X pattern, but what we're going to do is kind of have it on both sides of that D. So we're going to start by going in, doing our back stitch, and doing we're going to do our entire X pattern. Get that thread out of the way. There we go. And now for the X part, we're going to do one leg. And going to go down that again. And we're going to do the other leg of the X. Just like so. Beautiful. Now we're going to go ahead and cut those threads, get them out of the way. Now this is where you actually want to move your D-ring down to right next to where that X was created, like so. This will just be a little handy thing, like if you have a poop bag or if you have something you want. I always find it's handy to have an extra D-ring on your leash. So if there's something you want to attach to it, it is very simple to do so. And we're just going to sew as close as we can to the metal bits right here. And make sure we do a nice back stitch. We're going to sew all the way along, and then we're going to do another back stitch at the other end. And there we have it. Let's clip our threads. And that's it. Our leash is now done. Oh my goodness, look at how cute this leash is. I am so excited of how it turned out. And there we have it. We now have our very own dog leash in a super cute fabric. I love creating fun little unique things out of unique fabric that sometimes help you stand out. This way, the next time you go out on a dog walk, you can have a fun leash to smile about. If you're looking for this pattern, make sure you check in the description below. You'll be able to find it there, as well as all the other hardware and all the other necessities that you would need. I also have Amazon links for you so you can find them easier. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe so you can see other fun ways of creating wearable art, maybe a dog collar. It's coming up soon. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!